All right, welcome to The Explainer. We're about to jump into something pretty deep today. We're going to explore this really fascinating idea. What if all those similarities you see in world religions aren't just a coincidence? What if they're actually echoes of a single universal truth? Okay, let's dive right in.
It's a question a lot of people have probably thought about, right? You look around at all the different faiths in the world, and you start noticing these incredible overlaps. So, are they all just different ways of telling the same basic story? Different paths heading up the same mountain? Let's dig into some of these parallels.
Take the story of a great world-ending flood. I mean, it's everywhere. You've got Noah's Ark and Genesis, of course, but then there's Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh from ancient Mesopotamia, and you find it in Hinduism with the story of Manu. And what's crazy is how consistent the core pieces are. Some kind of divine warning, a special boat or vessel to survive, and the whole idea of saving humanity and the animals. Or how about this one, the idea of a divine trinity? It's not just in Christianity. In Hinduism, you have the Trimurti, that's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And if you go way back to ancient Egypt, you find triads like Osiris, Isis, and Horus. It's this recurring theme of a divine reality that's somehow, three in one. And then there's this other big one, the idea of a mediator, a go-between, right? A figure who can bridge that huge gap between us mere mortals and the divine. You see it in Greek philosophy with the concept of the logos, or in figures like Mithra from Persian traditions, and, of course, in Christianity, you have Jesus Christ. Okay, so what do we do with all these parallels? I mean, how are we supposed to interpret them? Well, the source material we're digging into today presents a really specific way of looking at this. It argues that these similarities don't actually prove that all religions are the same. No, it suggests they're pointing to something else, something completely different. The central idea here is something the sources call a distorted reflection. So think of it like this. These similarities aren't a bunch of different stories. Instead, they're fragmented, like shadows, of one single original truth that has just echoed down through human history and culture. And what's really interesting about this view is what it says about us, that maybe we're all sort of built to remember or long for something real, even if our stories get a little fuzzy or mixed up over the centuries. Let's see how this framework is actually put to use. Okay, so according to this perspective, there's a simple three-step method for looking at any of these parallels. Step 1, you identify the universal theme, the thing that pops up everywhere. Step 2, you look for the specific, unique distinction in the Christian version of that story. And step 3, you frame what's called the apologetic interpretation. And just so we're clear, apologetic here doesn't mean apologizing for anything. It's more like building a defense, making a logical case for a belief. So that last step is all about seeing how these parallels are used to argue that Christianity's claim is unique. All right, first up, let's use this lens to look at parallels that the sources say are basically faded, corrupted memories of things that actually happened in history. We just talked about the global flood story, right? It's the perfect place to start. So now, let's actually run it through that three-step process. We've already identified the parallel. That's step 1. So now, let's move on to step 2. What's the big distinction here? So, according to the sources, the key Christian distinction here is all about historicity. The argument is that the Genesis account isn't myth, it's presented as the pure, unvarnished historical record. All the other versions? Well, the idea is that they started from that same historical event, but then evolved over time into these really elaborate and, mythological stories. So here's the bottom line from this viewpoint. These stories are all echoes of something that actually happened. The fact that you find them in so many different, unconnected cultures is seen as powerful evidence that they all point back to one single shared historical origin. Okay, let's look at another one of these supposed historical memories. It's the theme of a lost paradise, a golden age where everything was perfect and from which humanity has fallen. You see it all over the place, in Greek mythology with their golden age, and in Hinduism with the concept of the Satya Yuga, which was this first age of absolute truth and perfection. So, what's the distinction here? Well, according to the source material, it's all about specificity. See, a lot of those other stories talk about this kind of general, almost cyclical decline of ages, but the Christian narrative pins the loss of paradise on one specific, pivotal moment, a clear moral choice, disobedience, that caused a relational break with God. And this, of course, leads to the whole theological concept of original sin. It's a very different kind of story. Okay, so we've looked at historical memories. Now let's shift gears.
The sources use the exact same framework to analyze parallels that they describe as, well, innate spiritual longings. These are ideas that seem to be almost hardwired into the human soul, no matter where you are in the world.
Think about this for a second. The idea of sacrifice to make up for doing something wrong, it's almost universal. I mean, from the detailed rituals in the Old Testament all the way to practices in ancient pagan cultures across the globe, this powerful intuition that wrongdoing requires a payment, and that payment often involves blood, is just everywhere.
And this is where we hit another one of those key distinctions, according to the sources. The sacrifice of Christ is presented as being totally unique. Why? Well, first, it's final. It's a once-and-for-all kind of deal, not something you have to repeat. And second, it's voluntary and divine. The argument is that this isn't humanity trying to appease an angry God. It's God himself providing the solution. That's a huge difference.
So, from this perspective, what were all those other sacrifices throughout history? They're seen as shadows. They were incomplete rehearsals, you could say, all pointing toward what is presented as the one, ultimate, perfect sacrifice. They were like an echo of a deep human need that in this view only finds its real answer in one specific event.
This next one is really fascinating. It's about the golden rule. Pretty much every religion and philosophy has some version of it. But the sources draw a sharp line here. They point out that most versions are actually what you could call a silver rule. They're a negative command. Do not do to others what you don't want them to do to you. It's about not causing harm, right? A command of restraint. The Christian version, though, flips it into a positive command. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's a whole different ballgame. It requires you to actively go out and do good, to show love. It's a subtle switch in wording, but a profoundly different instruction.
Okay, so we've looked at all these parallels through this very specific lens. We've seen the argument. So, where does this all lead? What's the big conclusion presented in our source material? After all this, where do these echoes actually point?
Let's recap real quick. We've looked at what are framed as faded historical memories, things like the flood and a lost golden age, where the Christian account is argued to be the specific historical anchor. And we've looked at these universal spiritual cravings for a mediator, for atonement through sacrifice, for a moral guide, where the Christian answer is presented as the unique and complete fulfillment of those longings. So here's the core argument that's being made. The idea is that all these global parallels, far from watering down or weakening Christianity's claims to be unique, actually do the opposite. They're seen as making the case stronger. They aren't interpreted as evidence that Christians just borrowed ideas, but as powerful, corroborating echoes of a single original truth. And to take that one step further, from this viewpoint, all those other traditions are seen as holding pieces of the puzzle, fragments of a universal truth revealed by God. And every single echo we've talked about, every faded memory, every deep spiritual longing is said to finally click into place, to find its complete and final form in one story.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. If this framework is correct, if all of humanity across thousands of years and thousands of miles has been hearing echoes of the very same story, what does that imply about the original voice that first spoke it?